One of the best parts about playing a role-playing game is in selecting your class, the fantasy job that you are going to take on, the fighter that you are going to become in this fantasy world, whether you're duking it out with swords or axes, spells, or fists. But today, we're going to talk about how you can progress without using a class at all. Hello everyone, my name is Kyle, I am the Dork, and that makes you fine folks the Desk, and you're watching Desks and Dorks. For those of you not in the know, we bring you indie tabletop role-playing content. I was trained as a medievalist. It's this perspective and the history that I like to bring to these games, and today we're going to be covering why people use class-based progression systems in their role-playing games, what kinds of systems you can use as an alternative to that, and what all of that has to do with a dead French playwright. Yes, it does matter, and I promise it will make sense by the end of the video. A couple things: we're on the march to 20k subscribers. If you want to join us, a subscription would mean a lot, and if you're on mobile, hyping this video is the single best way to let YouTube know that it's a good one for people to watch. With that out of the way, by the way, I asked last video what was something underrated about history, and I got this lovely response right here, which is all about how mercenary contracts worked, and I couldn't agree more. There's so much that we have missing about those times. The question that I'd like you to ask is in the comments below. If you want to join it, you might get featured in a video just like this one. Now, let's start our conversation off by talking about why GMs and game designers in general, and as an Emmy-nominated game designer, I can actually speak to this a little bit. Why do we use class progression systems at all? They're really popular, and yes, I know they're kind of the incumbent advantage in D&D, but there's a reason that multiple different games continue to use class-based progression systems even now. And I think the first one has to do with personalization. Part of what makes a role-playing game really interesting is it lets us embody a character that we don't normally get the chance to experience in our day-to-day lives. And classes, for all of their myriad flaws, offer perhaps this greatest of advantages. When you are playing a class, it gives you a route to both personalize your experience and experience something that you might not have in your day-to-day life. For example, if you want to be the strong person, or you think that that's going to be something cool that you didn't get a chance to experience regularly, why not play a barbarian or a fighting warrior of some kind? If you're the kind of person that longs for center stage, why not play a sort of silver-tongued rogue, somebody who talks their way out of a situation and uses powers, aura, and a little bit of that hot topic energy to continue to move forward and achieve their goals? If you are just a sneaky person, why not get a chance to maybe you've always wanted to be a sneaky person, why not get a chance to play a sneaky person and to continue to sculpt that character archetype for yourself? This is a really attractive thing for new players, and it's a really attractive thing for old players who love a system but want to experiment within that system in a new and exciting way. They give you a chance for expanding on things that you might like, so to speak. If you like certain aspects of a game, if you like the sneaking, guess what? You have options for classes to help you sneak. You like the fighting, you have options for classes to help you fight. And I think that matters a ton when we're doing class roles. You may be staring at these things and going, Kyle, what does this have to do with why class-based systems are useful for game designers? And that, my friends, has everything to do with symbolism. You see, to new or even sometimes returning players, role-playing games can be sometimes a daunting task, especially teaching them to somebody for the first time or running it for the first time as a game master. I'm sure many of us remember what that feels like, or are trying to introduce a friend and are experiencing that right now. In many ways, classes are great shorthand for the kind of things that a person could experience, and they work to symbolize different elements of core gameplay for the person that is in the outside looking in. If I see a shifty person in a black robe with knives, I'm going to imagine that they're probably some sort of stealth-based character. If I see a big hulking dude with a two-handed battle axe, I'm going to imagine that that's the kind of guy who can get busy on the front line. Either way, having a class that acts as a kind of shorthand for the things that you want to perform or the archetypes that you wish to embody in a role-playing game is incredibly, exceptionally useful, both for the designer, the game master, and ultimately the player. But one of the most important things is that it lets everybody have a lane. In general, most role-playing games are designed so that classes have a set identity, and that those identities might support or in some cases intertwine with another, but they don't usually overlap in ways that invalidate one or the other, unless it's a poorly designed game, but we'll get into that maybe later, right? The idea of everybody having a lane, though, is incredibly and critically important. People want to feel useful in a role-playing game. They want to feel like they contribute either in role-playing, out of combat, or during combat for their team, and giving everybody something to do, an option for them to excel in, or something for them to really excel at, is a critical part of why classes serve as such a great boon, especially in fantasy role-playing games where you're going to be contending with magic and monsters. You don't want to be worrying about something like your interpersonal relationships or the skill set that you bring to a team. When everybody has something to do, when everybody has a lane to excel in, it generally makes the entire experience feel a lot more well-rounded, and it allows players to feel useful and helpful to the friends. And again, right, working together tends to be the best power, even when there are literal lightning bolts flying around every single second. And lastly, and this is probably the most conjecture I'll get in this video, but I do think a lot of this has to do with, especially here in the West, how we equate personal value to career advancement. A lot of times, fantasy classes are treated like jobs by modern players, right? I'll just use the D&D parlance, but like fighters generally tend to guard towns, or even in far more esoteric games, spellcasters take on this role of alchemists or advisors or spy masters within this strange world. And despite the fact that a fantasy class is in reality not really a career path, but a set of skills and tactics that are made and meant to help you in battle or in role-playing, we generally tend to kind of view them through the lens of our jobs. At least here in the West, I've noticed that is true both in player sensibility and in designer sensibility. And in that way, having a job to glom onto is kind of familiar to a Western player, because they're going to be like, oh yes, my value sometimes is derived from my career. This is very similar, and it allows them to take a fantasy concept, like those character classes, and ascribe to them a real-world value that they're familiar with. And I think that's actually pretty grounding, again, especially for new and beginning players to a role-playing game system. All of these different things are part of the reason that fantasy classes have been useful in design, but that doesn't mean that I think they're the end-all be-all. And I'm really excited because a new school of role-playing games has begun to crop up and innovate what you can and can't do, and I really think there's a lot of exciting ground to explore for true classless systems. All right, so let's talk about what kind of options there are. I've got 3 that I think make for great classless level-based systems. And the first one has to do with your stats, like strength, except in our case, we're going to be talking about stat-based options in general. Not just strength, but the attributes that make up a character who they are. Things like the body, how strong they are, the mind, how intelligent they are. And there's really 2 systems that do this particularly well. Cortex is the base system, and one of my personal favorite RPGs, which is Demon Hunters. This is based on a B horror movie and sci-fi legacy that I absolutely love. Think SCP Foundation if it was crossed with like The Office, and you have basically the kind of vibe that this game goes for. These systems involve your stats being dice. Every single person starts with a low dice for their stat. So somebody who would be physically weak doesn't have a stat number. They roll a d4, the lowest of the possible dice they can in these systems. Then, as time progresses, as those characters level up, their stats begin to grow in strength. So somebody who is incredibly strong might have a d12 strength or a d20 strength, and then once you hit d20, you'll add additional dice onto that. However, what I think this game does exceptionally well, and where I think it truly pops off, is in the addition of traits. Other than stats, these work kind of like that, right? You might have a trait in a lower level dice and replace it with a trait of a higher level dice. You might be wondering why I've put a random picture of a dude pulling a gun out of a pocket that is too comically small for said firearm. The reason is that in Demon Hunters, one of my favorite traits is called a PDP, or a portable pocket dimension. I love that trait. And at a D6 level, it lets you reach into a pocket and pull out, I don't know, something larger, like a laptop or a firearm of particularly large size. At higher levels, it lets you just pull dynamite out of a pocket. And at even higher levels, it lets you do Animaniacs level garbage, pulling entire airplanes and cars out of your trench coat in the middle of situations. I love this particular system for a number of different reasons, but not just the tongue-in-cheek humor, or in Cortex's case, a far more grounded and realistic view for some of these, right? And truthfully, I think why you might like it is these kinds of skill trees lend themselves to great degrees of personalization within a group where you want everybody to feel relatively similar. What I mean by that is that this allows for self-expression without taking away from group identity as a whole, right? You can shine on your own while still being thematically consistent to the game world. Picture for a moment running a game within Cortex where you are all bank robbers attempting to actually track stuff down. In order to stay thematically consistent, there's not really classes here. You're all bank robbers, but your traits, the stats that you've got, and the abilities that you gain access to and level up as the game progresses allow you to do a lot of the same stuff that classes have done in fantasy role-playing games and continue to apply them here. I really freaking like this, and it actually, I think, is a much easier way to teach a game, because instead of having to look at charts or confusing numbers, it's just like, oh, well, what do I roll to try to haul myself up on this ledge? Well, my strength is a D8. Guess what I'm rolling? It's a D8, right? And you can continue to move on from there. Also, having the fun and funky traits that Demon Hunters does, and the more interesting ones that would be perhaps more applicable to a fantasy role-playing game like Cortex does, allow you to actually add some extra zhuzh and some extra excitement to your characters. I remember playing a version of Cortex in a fictional version of the Third Crusade, and it was really cool to watch people play around with the trait system to create, I don't know, not classes necessarily, but to create characters that felt thematically unique and mechanically different, but were still within the sort of overarching umbrella of the Crusader warrior trying to make good in the Holy Land. Now, the other thing that you can do is leveling up and progression through activity. I like to call this the Elder Scrolls. No, not that one. No, go away. This one. There we go. The Morrowind or the Oblivion example, right? These games were revolutionary at the time for allowing your character to, yes, level up, but to gain skill the more that you used the skill. And that's what I mean by activity-based progression, right? You're not leveling up in Fighter, you are getting better at swinging a sword because that's all you've done for the entire campaign. You're not getting better with magic, you're actually practicing and dealing with the fallout therein in order to increase your abilities. You can't start like Inigo Montoya, but through hard work and great effort, you can reach there. You can't begin like, one of the great mighty 300 warriors, but if you stand shoulder to shoulder and you practice on the beach shirtless and whatever else, my montage moment, you might be able to get there. You're never going to be able to start off by convincing people that, hey, maybe you don't want the smoke with me, even though I look like an adorable Midwestern farm girl. You're gonna have to start by maybe occasionally asking for a 5% discount at your local convenience store. What I love about this particular type of system is that it allows for players to gain expression and identification through the tasks that they want to do. A player in a game like this isn't going to start off by saying, I want to be a thief. They're going to engage with it holistically, trying to steal stuff to be a thief. They're not going to begin trying to be a magic user. They might find something that pushes them on the path of magic, and from there, that's where the fun really starts. And one of my favorite systems, and I actually genuinely believe the system that does this the best, is Never Stop Blowing Up. I cannot tell you how insane it is to have wanted a system like Morrowind or like Oblivion and then played this game and seen people play this game and be like, oh my god, this is everything that I want. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the system, it is based off cheesy action films and basically just bombastic media properties of the 80s and beyond. Every character starts with a D4, no matter what they do. However, if you roll the maximum dice value, you blow up. So assuming that I'm like, let's take this into fantasy, right? I'm going to pick the lock on the door. I roll a 4. That allows me to instead unlock the next dice, I keep the 4 result, and I roll the d6. If I get the 6, I move up to the 8, so on and so forth. And for the rest of that game, my stat is now set at a higher level. This allows for 2 incredibly interesting things. One, it leads to these insane moments where a character with a low probability of doing something is able to absolutely tear the lid off the game because they managed to roll max dice values 4 times in a row. There is nothing cooler than when someone goes 4 on a d4, 6 on a d6, 8 on a d8, 10 on a d10, and then they roll the d12, they don't get the max, but it's more than enough to absolutely crush a character roll or a character moment. It really goes a long way to selling this fantasy of you being a beginning action hero, somebody who is trying to create this system or trying to really rise up to the occasion and then suddenly being able to do it. It feels like it resonates with the kind of stories these games are trying to tell. It also leads to the kind of character progression that's really interesting. I love, for example, how in Die Hard, the tension slowly mounts up, right? Begins with John McClane kind of just trying his best as an average cop, and then by the end of the movie, after firefight after firefight, after rappelling down a building in a garden hose, and finally reuniting with his wife after defeating a literal army of hijackers, he wins, right? Like, he wins. It fits that lore, right? It's the slow buildup, the blow up, in this case, of this particular system. There are a ton of great advantages to this, but mostly it's ease of teach, it's experience-based, and what I love the most is that it just lends to these incredibly bombastic moments of raw action. But finally, let's talk about resource-based progression, because this is the one that I think excites me the most as someone that spends the majority of my time in the realms of low fantasy. Now, when you're duking it out on the hinterlands or you're pushing the frontiers full of monsters and bandits and ne'er-do-wells, there is one type of currency, there is one type of quote-unquote experience points that a lot of games tend to forget, and except that one game, Band of Blades, does a great job with this, and that is the idea of supplies. In a game, instead of leveling up, let's imagine that you live in a world or you're playing a system or game where all of the players are incredibly fragile. In a system like this, the margin for error is basically nil. Every arrow, every piece of food, every spare bedroll and canvas tarp is what is going to make or break your survival in the world. And in a system like this, leveling up, quote unquote, and gaining progression might not be related to the abilities that you gain or the new spells or the new companions. It might be that you are rewarded with the necessary supplies to make the hard decisions that are going to come next. Food, equipment, armor, weapons, information, vehicles, and most importantly, time all become the currency by which you and the people you are playing with get stronger. It is an amazing system to do this, and if you're looking for a quote-unquote progression system, I highly recommend using a resource-based one if you want to lean into the dangers that are implicit in a fantasy setting. Band of Brothers does this beautifully. These characters do gain experience, quote unquote, but they're not getting any extra hit points, and they're certainly not getting any stronger. One errant bullet, one explosion gone awry, and you are being sent back to life's proverbial lobby, and mentally the strain continues to wear down on them as well. However, information and time, resources, and just ammunition in general wind up becoming the currency by which their lot in life improves. I think that is critical to the kind of games that want to be run like this. Now, what would you use a system like this for, or resource-based progression in, and what kind of game would you particularly be running? If you're a fan of something like Darkest Dungeon, something that is grim, brutal, gritty, and comes with an understanding that you are most likely going to lose many, if not almost all, of the characters that you came in with, then a resource-based progression system is for you. It simulates quite a lot of the nitty-gritty of both running an army and battling in an army, but also in working with and working around the limitations that are imposed on the regular human person. A survival-based game as well is another great place where resource-based progression works. If you've played a video game like Sons of the Forest, or you grew up reading books like Hatchet or Brian's Winter, you will know the difference that food and a good tool or the ability to make shelter does in terms of a character's quote-unquote progression. And lastly, if you love the danger that is implicit with these kinds of systems, and you know that you have players who are willing to trust you and take that plunge with you, this is an ideal way to do it. But now that we're almost at the end of our video, I need to talk about stereotypes for a second and how they relate to the French playwright Molière, because it goes a long way to explaining why character classes in general and character-based progression is useful. Ah, yes, Molière. For those not in the know, Molière is one of France's, if not France's, most renowned playwright. He was a dramatist, but he was also primarily known during his life for his comedies and his satires, which used a skewering wit combined with a wonderful sense of humor that sometimes skews to the, shall we say, vulgar, to really kind of skewer the upper class and the frivolities and foolishness of life. Born Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, one of the things that made Molière special, though, was that he was from a larger school of neoclassical French playwrights that primarily used stereotypes in their work. You see, when we think of stereotype now, it has a negative connotation, but in Molière's day, it was an important way of actually making sure that your plays were understandable. These stereotypes were the way that you could make your work, which would only really traditionally be seen by the lower classes and even the middle class very rarely, into something that was understandable, digestible, and even translatable to their everyday lives. Stuff like the bumbling but strong idiot knight and the corrupt religious official, the wise jester, and even the lustful maid were all common stereotypes within Molière's comedy and within this greater school of neoclassical French playwriting. This was important shorthand, just like the character classes in Dungeons & Dragons and other fantasy RPGs help you, the player or the game master, understand what you're getting as a kind of visual gamified shorthand. So too did Molière's stereotypes help the audience understand that character's arc. The best modern example I can think of for this kind of dramatic shorthand is the way that comic book characters work now. You know, if you go see a Batman movie, there's going to be some amount of brooding and some amount of interesting stuff happening in terms of crime fighting. You know, if you go to a Superman movie, it's going to feature godlike power, yes, but also the humility and the kindness that Superman's character has become synonymous with. These are shorthands, right? We have come to expect that from these characters in the same way that Molière's contemporaries and his audience members would expect certain things from those stereotypes. And those go a long way to helping inspire the kinds of character stereotypes that are common everywhere. Molière's work and the work of that school of neoclassical French literature and drama is incredibly important and foundational, I would argue, to the history of American English and understanding, particularly in the fantasy canon, which would have been important to inspiring fantasy role-playing games. Also, this is Conjecture Zone. This part right now is Conjecture Zone. Conjecture Zone. But I do have to think that Molière's use, or at least the schools of playwrights' use of the dumb idiot knight, is probably the first time that we've ever had a dumb jock in anything ever. And again, if you want to know how deep this pop cultural importance of Molière goes for helping to create and sculpt stereotypes, you have to look no further than one of the most popular movies in the 80s. I would like to draw your attention to Breakfast Club. In many ways, Breakfast Club is a movie about stereotypes. It is a movie about these people who are viewed in certain lenses, right? The jock, the burnout, the nerd, the weird girl, the geek, whatever. And those characters rebelling against that kind of visual shorthand that they have been pigeonholed into their entire lives. It is an opportunity for them to rebel against that and redefine who they are, reassert their own identities, and reassert their own place, not just in the lives of the people around them, but in each other's lives. And I think that's kind of important. And if you don't believe me, in the beginning of the movie, you can see the arrow pointing to the book now. Bender is going through a library cart, and he literally says, "What are you looking at?" "Ah, yeah, Molière really pumps my nads," and he rips the book apart. John Hughes literally starts a movie about characters who are stereotypes, rebelling against their stereotypes, and he begins the movie with one of those characters ripping up a book of the master of stereotypes in drama. Yes, that is a real thing. It's amazing, and I love it. But that goes to show just how important that French school of thought and that use of stereotypes, not just in French plays, but in plays in the Western canon at all, goes to inspire those kinds of character classes. Ultimately, though, I don't think a stereotype in this way is bad for us as game masters, as again, it does have a really useful connotation as, again, that kind of shorthand or that personalization angle for our players. But it doesn't mean that you can't explore some new, interesting, classless ways of playing games. And with that, my friends, it brings us to the end of today's video. If you would like to support the kind of content that we do here, obviously the like, the share, the subscription, it all goes a long way, the hyping too. But if you have $10 a month and you would like to get a unique role-playing game that you can't get anywhere else, as well as the backlog of Patreon role-playing games, about 9 in total, then $10 a month takes you to Patreon. It's the best way to support me. Lets me make this kind of content. We are running a winter sale right now. So if you're like, I don't only have $10 a month, but I have a $15 burning a hole in my pocket that I can spend one time, you can get pretty much all of our games for $15 over on itch.io. It is the biggest sale that we've ever done. And again, it goes quite a long way to helping me out and to support the kind of work that we do here. But speaking of that, I have to thank my incredible patrons, Dionysus, Chris Bates, Agile Monk, Kavadi, Alex.vksh, Solution, Stefan Brousseau, Brian, Gorbino the Great, Papa Dinosaur, Chromatic Orbital Strike, Chris Mayer, Darth, Arcane Bard, Commander Unidentified, Darjeeling Trailblazer, Carl Agius, David Z, Michael Torres, Talath, Veralder, Cadme, Ashley Smith, and my incredible YouTube members, Agile Monk, Joshua Williams, Artemis, Samuel Putnam, Seralder, Chandler Dwyer, Hatsus, Up, Down, Down, Left, Right, Jakob, Krebo, Tebby Boy, Brody Stumpf, Ryan D, Thunderdash, Gaming Gambison, Franco, Dried Squid, and Israel Joiner 6186. You are all absolutely amazing. Thank you again so much for your support, and thanks you to those of you who have watched. It really does mean a lot to me. Thank you again for the continued support and the encouraging comments and just all of it, man. Y'all are absolutely great. But I'm Kyle out for Desks and Dorks. You all been absolutely amazing, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.